Okay, so let's read a couple of scriptures here to begin. Romans 1:16 and 17. I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. To the Jew first, also to the Greek, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. And then another one, 1 Corinthians 1:18. Let's get to that place here. 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Okay, so last time we did talk a little bit about the rise of Enlightenment thinking, and how did that go? How did that go for Britain? Well, there was a very famous, it gave birth to something kind of interesting. It gave birth to satire. There was an artist by the name of William Hogarth, and he drew, you can see these pictures, the kid taking a whiz on the wall there, just the general tone of what's going on in England. So the Age of Reason, we talked about this, Age of Reason, two primary figures in that. One man, John Locke, empiricism, experience is the only source of credible information. If you haven't experienced anything, you really don't know anything. And then David Hume, skepticism, all knowledge is uncertain. It's impossible to know truth. So this kind of thinking, these are just two of the leaders of this kind of ideas that were being put out into the society. And then you add to that, like the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, and you start to see people they're reaping the consequences of the absence of God in their thinking. God is not absent, but they have left him out of their thinking. And part of the reason, here's another drawing from Mr. Hogarth, part of the reason is the church. You can see the preacher is sitting there reading something, the lectern is sleeping, this woman is not dressed so well, and people all throughout the audience are sleeping through. So there's no fire. Religion is cold, it's dead, and sin is going crazy. Now let's look at some of these problems. It's called the gin age. Gin is a very strong drink. It's strong drink. Slave trading started to flourish in this age. Hanging shows, cockfighting, which is roosters being set, not like dog fighting, but dog fighting might be the day, but this is cockfighting, roosters, gambling. And this is maybe the most significant, this from 1730 to 1750, 3 out of every 4 children died before the age of 5. That's remarkable when you think about that. That's 20 years. That's 20 years where 75% of the children didn't reach age 5. So you got neglect, you got abuse, you got exposure. And England is like in disarray. And you got this man who's painting pictures of just how, everything is in disarray. Now remember, I showed you good art last week, right? This is satirical art. And you can pick out the various sinful behaviors that are happening throughout all of that. So he's just commenting on society. He's just, so how does God answer these kinds of things? How does God answer these kinds of things, this kind of society? Now we know when we read the Old Testament, we know when these situations got to a certain point, there would come an Amos. and Amos would come, which is very, I want to use that picture because we're talking about, it seems to be that the most educated people and the higher standing people are the ones who get captivated into the sinful ways, and then it filters down into society. And so the fact that the most learned people in Britain were related to the church, because that's where those are the people who got educated, were the people related to the church, were not giving people what they needed to live by. And so, what kind of man was Amos? Anyone over here? Over here? Anyone? No? Yes, Nick. Yeah, like a shepherd and a gardener, herdmen tending sycamore trees. He says that himself. It's like if you read toward the end of the book of Amos, there's an official of the king who said, "King, you got to shut this guy up." It's like the people are just, he's talking judgment, and the people don't like it, and they're like getting discouraged because he's talking about their sins. And Amos says, I was just out in the field, watching my flock and tending the sycamore trees when God said, "Go to Israel and preach." So here I am. And he preached stories. So, when we see God use this model, when we see this model playing out in society, like people say, like, wow, why would God use unlearned men? It's like in the book of Acts, we know that the learned Pharisees and the religious officials noticed and remembered when Peter and James and these other ones were powerful preachers. They noted that they had been with Jesus. They were unlearned men. And they said Jesus was unlearned. They said, where did he get this knowledge? So this is, what does God do? He brings into the situation people. I'm using people because the way society turned around, there's a woman really at the center of it. So Holy Club, this is how does the tide turn? In England, it will be Holy Club Bible Society, open air preaching. Now remember, let's go back. Where are we? This is what people were sitting under. They're going into these large churches. They're listening to cold sermons from preachers with cold hearts. And it's a good question. Were the preachers even converted by the word that they preached and studied? They're presenting the Bible. Did they really have, this is going to be this era that we're talking about, 1700s to the middle of the 1800s, into the early 1900s. This is where the sense of the spiritual awakening, the idea of the heart work that must happen in a person's salvation, begins to take hold. So open air preaching. So one of the things is music of Isaac Watts, and we'll talk just briefly about him. Again, we see that it's preaching and music. It's preaching and worship that begins to change the way that Britain is. And what happens in Britain also is paralleled, and at the same time, there's something that is happening in America. So as Britain is reviving, America also is awakening. And so these are two things that are happening almost simultaneously. And the big thing is that they're going to lead to political transformation. America, the American experiment will happen, and it'll be a political transformation because of the Great Awakening. But let's go back to England, back to the other side of the ocean, and let's look at this. This is probably the most important person in the whole situation, Susanna Wesley. It's kind of interesting, all right? Susanna Wesley. Susanna Wesley was the 25th child of her parents. The 25th child of her parents. Now, remember that category, a lot of infants died, so at this period of time, so did all 25. So Susanna married Charles Wesley, no, not Charles, what was his name? I can't remember, Samuel. Samuel was his name. All right, so we have Susanna. So we have to look at Susanna, and it's important because her two children, Charles and John Wesley primarily, but Charles also, will transform Britain and by extension, America. Wesley, Whitefield, we're talking about two Wesleys, we're talking about one Whitefield, we're talking about Jonathan Edwards, Francis Asbury. We're going to get through these people tonight, I hope. So Susanna was the 25th child in her home. Susanna herself had 19 children. All right, 19 children, okay? So there's like a lot of writing. There's like a lot of writing about Samuel and Susanna's. You got to be very careful, okay? I just want you to, how am I trying to say this? There's a group thinking over here about the nature of women in ministry. And when they write things, they sometimes they write with their agenda in mind. So they talk about Susanna and Samuel Wesley's loveless marriage. And then you find out that Susanna and Samuel Wesley had 19 children. So something just doesn't add up there. Her parents had 25 children, she had 19 children. If you're saying that Susanna was in a loveless marriage, I'm saying it was a marriage in turmoil. There were situations. Her husband was devoted to putting out this exegetical commentary of Job. He spent his whole life doing this, and he actually was bad with finances. And there was a point in time when he went to London in order to try to earn money for the family, and Susanna actually was raising the whole family herself. The house burned down. John Wesley was miraculously pulled out of the fire before he died. Number 15. He's number 15 out of the 19 children. Now, 9 of these children did not reach, 9 of these children died under the age of 5. So, and then only 8 were alive at the time of her death. So, but John and Charles Wesley are two people who changed the world, really. They changed the world with the thing. Now, Susanna Wesley, she knew bad preaching when she heard it. So what do you do about that? This is a thing, okay. So this is a model, okay. So, how did Susanna Wesley handle bad preaching in this society that was dominated? If she would stand in a pulpit, she would have been maybe arrested. Some people were arrested. John Wesley, John Bunyan, they were arrested for preaching without a license. What would they have done to a woman preaching without a license? So Susanna Wesley, she already had a congregation, right? Right? Who's her congregation? Our children. Yeah, her children. So what she would do on Sunday afternoon, she'd go to church, listen to the boring sermon by the pastor that her husband appointed to the pulpit while he was gone. So she would just she would get one of her husband's printed sermons, and then she would sing a couple of psalms with her children, and then she would read one of the sermons. And then before she knew it, she had 200 people coming after church to listen to her read the sermon. So this is what happened. So Susanna Wesley, this is how her life went. So you could see this. So her parlor was full, and this is what happened. So the climate in England in these centuries, dry, cold, barren, and these men will come into this situation. God will bring these men out of Oxford. Now, John is maybe the most, he and Whitefield, George Whitefield, are the most colorful figures in this whole thing. At Oxford, which is the primary training ground for Church of England preachers, this is where John and Charles wound up, and four of them. Whitefield wasn't really a part of them. He was a little bit younger than John, I believe 11 years younger than John. But they were, as they're reading the Bible, as they're seeing what they see in the cold churches, as they're seeing what they're seeing in society, they decide that they are going to form this kind of confederation, this club, this communion, this community that happens. So this seems to be, again, you can go back to what we talked about with the Pietist movement when Philip Jakob Spener in Frankfurt and Heidelberg began gathering groups around his table. Martin Luther would do this with table talk. It's like, this seems to be like God always finds a way to bring people together who are like-minded, and they begin to speak about this thing, consecration. Like, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to have a life devoted to living for Jesus? And again, they start seeing this idea. They're reading from the Bible, Help the Needy. They begin a prison ministry. And then this idea of systematic study, prayer, fasting, methodical lifestyle. And that's why they became called Methodists, okay? They became Methodists because this was when people started calling believers Christians, it was a mockery. It was a mockery because in those days, everyone in the Roman Empire had heard that this Jesus guy had a bunch of followers, and they lifted him up from they lifted him up on the cross, and he died. And they believed that he was still dead, his body was missing, all that stuff, that whole rumor. And Christian, when they started calling people Christians, it wasn't like, oh, that's great, you're a Christian. No, it was like, yeah, you're a Christian. It's like, it's like the way that we would talk about Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Like, when you get out of the car some Saturdays, if you're getting out of the car in your outreach and you see people very nicely dressed carrying briefcases and knocking on doors, it's like, oh, it's the JWs. It is. It's like they, look at them. They're working very hard to try and become part of the 144,000 righteous ones or whatever. So we do the same thing. So it's all right. You can. What's that?
The Catholics, I thought we do the same thing with they're just Catholics.
Catholics are what?
The same thing we do to Jehovah's Witnesses. We do the same thing to Catholics too.
Catholics, they knock on doors? I don't see Catholic.
I do that.
I didn't see a Catholic. I was a Catholic for a lot of years. I never knocked on a door.
Okay.
I don't know. I didn't. All right, but I'm just saying, or maybe you talk about Catholics. We talk about Catholics that way. There they go. They're going. Anyway, but Methodists. Now, the thing that Wesley would become a part of would be this pioneering effort by George Whitefield to preach outdoors. Now, Whitefield was unlicensed, and they wouldn't let him preach in the pulpit, so he would just stand up and start talking to people. And when Whitefield went to America, he told Wesley, he said, you got to do this. And Wesley wasn't sure that it was a great idea. Is it a great idea to stand in the middle of a group of people? And, Whitefield went there. And then after Whitefield went to America, then Wesley went to America. So this is the genesis, the origin of what we would call heart religion. Heart work becomes an emphasis in this period of time. Because John Wesley's methodical, remember? He's methodical. Okay, so we got a cold church. We got a cold pulpit. We got a cold church. We got a cold old church, and we're not going anywhere. But they're reading the Bible, and they're suddenly feeling their hearts strangely warmed by the words of Jesus. And what's going to happen is, are we going to do something about it? Are we going to start preaching? So Whitefield starts preaching outdoors, and people start coming to listen to him. It's amazing. But there were people praying for this. I mean, we were talking today, about the women. There was 2 women that prayed in Maine that God would raise up a man who would have a heart after God, a heart for the Bible, and a heart for reaching the world with the gospel. And God did that, answered that prayer. So, we talk about people like Susanna Wesley, and we talk about other people who were praying. They wanted this kind of movement to happen. So did these people just sort of happen? No, God moved because of the prayers of people that we'll only find out about when we get to heaven. So, George Whitefield and, Charles Wesley and John Wesley are the people that are moved to start this work on the streets, this street preaching, this evangelism, this way of thinking and living for God according to the scriptures and a lifestyle. All right. So the Wesleys go to America. This is something Susanna sort of prevailed upon them. So they're sailing to Georgia. Now this is on that ship got caught in a storm. The Moravians on board were very peaceful. This was like something that stunned them. Like the Wesleys were they were just so fearful of dying. And they went to America in order to witness to the Indians in Georgia. And it didn't go so well. It didn't go well at all, actually. It went terribly. I mean, John Wesley fell in love with a woman. The woman did not love him. And so when she didn't return his affections, he basically slandered her. He basically slandered her. So in the church that he was talking about her. He refused communion to her. She eloped. She ran away with another man. The woman that John Wesley loved, she ran away with another man. And then when John Wesley was leading church, when this other man and this woman came forward, he refused them communion. So it was a big stinking thing. So I want you to understand, when we talk about John Wesley, we got to think of Peter denied Jesus, David had his affair with Bathsheba. John Wesley, he writes about it in his journal. He writes about and he writes about the kind of feeling. He went home to England. He went home to England in brokenness. But he always remembered these Moravians, this group of people who were on the boat with him. As the storm came, these people started singing in German. And, he couldn't understand how they were so peaceful. And but he got to Georgia and it didn't really matter. Once he got to Georgia, he was still, and then he fell in love with this woman, and this woman didn't return his affections, and it got to be a great big mess, just to say that. So John Wesley's life was a great big mess when he got back to Britain. But that wasn't the end of the story. That wasn't the end of the story. They met this man, Peter Böhler, who was a Moravian. And Moravians had Sunday night meetings. And in Sunday night meetings, this guy goes to this London Fetter Lane Society. It was a group. And these are the things. This is maybe the most important element of everything here, is what they're preaching. What the Moravians are preaching is this idea of surrender, conversion, and joy in believing. We feel this. We say, what do we say when we leave a service that has really affected us? What are some of the words that we use to describe that service? Anointed, what else? What's that? Blessing. Yeah, blessing. We sense the presence of God, So this is new. We find it interesting. Now, I'm saying it's new in that it's sort of more out in the open. I'm not saying it's not happening. It's just not happening with people noticing it. So when we talk about these people that become figures in church history, there are going to be thousands upon thousands of people that we read about and talk about when we get to the New Jerusalem and everything is set in order. There's going to be thousands of things that we're going to read about and talk about people who we didn't even realize. There was no books written about them. There's going to be people that are in China or in India or in Africa or in Uruguay, which, because I say Uruguay because it's like this. You don't realize, you think about these, we talk about North Korea, we talk about Iran, we talk about these there's a really wicked country in the middle of South America that's called Uruguay. It is illegal to have religious holidays in Uruguay. I don't know if you know that, but you can read about it. It's kind of interesting. It's it's like really crazy. It's just really crazy. Who went there? Like some people think a bunch of Nazis escaped and they started Uruguay, and that's what's there. It's like, I don't know. I haven't heard that, but it's very interesting. All right. So here's John talking about the experience he had one night. So what they're doing is they're just opening a book. I was listening to Luther's description of the change which God works in the heart through faith in Christ. I felt my heart strangely warmed. I felt I did trust Christ alone for salvation, and an assurance was given me. Okay, so here's basically Charles and John Wesley are methodically living the Christian life, but they have no power. They have not surrendered themselves to the Holy Spirit. And this finally happens. So you have like these threads of Christian movements coming together. The Moravians meet the Wesleys and the Methodists become a force, a very powerful force. We don't, when you think of the Methodist Church today, you don't think so much about them being a holy club, starting as a holy club. I wonder if you would go into a Methodist church today that had one of those interesting flags in front of it and like start reading from their founders' like journal, Charles Wesley, John Wesley. Just start reading from it and just seeing the reactions that they had. It might be a little bit interesting. But, now again, Charles, Isaac Watts, these people are hymn writers also. This is another thing. I mean, writing 6,500 hymns, a great poet. So he was a missionary to Georgia too. So John and Charles together, begin to create like a different kind of church culture. A different kind of church culture. It's going to take a while before it becomes. It's going to take a while before it becomes something important in England, but in America, it's going to take off. It's going to take off because this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. Did you know that? Right? You know that, right? It's the land of the free and the home of the brave. Yeah, where the rocket's red glare and the eclipse we stare, at which we stare. Anyway, hey, I got to tell you something. Okay, it's really interesting. It's very interesting. Very interesting. Leave it to God. Leave it to God to stop social media. Yesterday, for the 3 hours where the eclipse was totality in certain point, the use of the internet dropped to its lowest point in 20 years. I heard it on the radio today. The news is saying, like, people stopped looking at their screens and looked to the sky. It's amazing. And are we worried? Why are we so worried that God has lost control of everything? All he's got to do is like it's just really interesting that the moon like fits perfectly in that little part of, just where it is. And it's like, it's a ring. It's like, wow, it's amazing. Anyway, there's a joke. Any Dallas Cowboy fans here? No? Okay. There's a joke that someone say, the moon got a ring before the Dallas Cowboys got a ring, or something like that. It's kind of interesting, but that's another thing. Okay, so Charles Wesley, writing, these guys, God brings, is changing the church culture. Hymns, poetry, all of these things. Now, here's some verses. I'm just going to go through these, but you're going to listen to this song at the end. I got 2 songs for you tonight. Two closing songs. Jesus, Lover of My Soul, and another song by Isaac Watts. So don't worry about the words. You'll see them later. Okay, now we got to shift to John. Now, Charles just basically spent most of his life writing psalms, and which is important. John organized, launched a movement with his very life. That's the thing. 50 years of preaching career. Methodist was a united society. This is like, you're talking about church in a different way. Because church had come to represent like a building and a different mode of operation, they started using different names. Assemblies of God were never to be called an Assemblies of God church. They wanted to be called assemblies because they thought that church turned people off. And, we'll talk about that when we talk about the Assembly of God. But only converted people were allowed to be a part of the society. And converts were expected to make other converts. And then this started this idea of circuit preaching, circuit preachers. Okay, now 2 things are happening. I got to tell you about this. 2 things that are happening in Britain and in England. Now, when I say to you these words, "Go west, young man," what do you think about? Go west, young man. Do you know what that means in American history? Horace Greeley? No? Not even the homeschoolers know it. This is like ridiculous. Horace Greeley said, "Go west, young man." He wrote a famous editorial that there's land, lots of land out in the west, and you can go west and you can have a piece of territory. So that's interesting. So I'm just, okay. There's no hope for America. There's just no. I'll be back in a second. Okay. Go west, young man. But it was also happening in Britain. It's like the thing that you need to know is like people were getting out of the city and they were moving to places where there were not churches. So these circuit preachers became very important to the fabric of church life and to the fabric of Christianity. So circuit preachers, horseback riding, like going from town to town, preaching a message, having a weekend of sermons, and then moving on. Now this is great, and it's not great, all right? It's great and it's ungreat. It's great because there's like a fire that comes in. It's like the carnival comes to town. It's like there's a lot of people get interested in being saved, and they do get saved. Instant conversion. This is the joy, the surrender, instant. It happens. And it happens in the Bible, and it happens when Jesus does it. Okay, the woman at the well is an instant conversion. The thief on the cross is a very instant conversion. Yes, Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus climbs up in a tree. Jesus, I'm coming to have lunch with you. It's an instant conversion. Salvation came to his home on that day. Nicodemus doesn't seem to be like an instant conversion. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen right away. He's like pondering it. But by the end of the story of the Gospels, he's converted because he's like putting Jesus's body. So the way that people come to Christ is sometimes very instant and sometimes slow and long. In my case, it was slow and long, and then it happened in an instant. It was slow and long. Throughout my teenage years, I'd have periods of like really wanting to be a good Catholic. I'd do all the stuff. I'd kiss Jesus's feet on the cross on Good Friday, all that stuff. I'd go to the longest mass possible. I showed up said all my prayers every day, all that kind of thing. And then, I turned 16, got a car, girlfriends, that kind of thing. Then I'm not such a good Catholic for a while. Then I get hooked up with something else, and then one night I see a Rapture movie and I get saved in an instant. It's like I got up and I went forward. I didn't even know what I was doing. And circuit preachers come and they get instant salvations. That's the kind of thing. So how much did Wesley do? All right, Wesley traveled 250,000 miles on a horseback. He preached 40,000 sermons. He ignored the boundaries. Now, there's a parish system, all right, a parish system, which meant that I'm the preacher for this area. You don't come to my area and preach. And Wesley said, forget that. I'm going to come to your area and preach. If you don't like it that they're coming to hear me, then maybe you should be a better preacher. Now, the thing is, Wesley was not the greatest of preachers. If you read some of the things, he's not like Whitefield. Whitefield is here in terms of style and eloquence and everything like that. And Wesley is just determined. He's maybe it's like Joshua and Caleb, but they were, they were following God. So the world is my parish. Anyone who wanted to preach, he just taught them how to preach. It's like they didn't have lay preachers. It's like lay preachers is like just anyone in the church. A guy wants to preach. Hey, go preach. Where am I going to preach? Well, One time I preached on my dad's tombstone. That's what John Wesley did. Couldn't find any place to preach in a church, so he just went to the graveyard, stood up on his father's tombstone, and before he knew it, there was like 800 to 1,000 people listening to him. Like, that's the kind of thing that happened. So the churches were moved to share the gospel. So this is the energy and also the agitation. Because the guys who were established in the parish churches, they are paid by the government. They are licensed by the government in England. They have a job. It's a job to do, and they're doing their job. And now these other guys are preaching fire, and they're preaching people are getting joy, and they're getting excited about the Bible, and they're coming to this is the rise of the power of the pew. Okay, you know what I'm saying? You know what the pew is, right? The church seats. All right, rise of the power of the pew. We're not talking about something that smells. We're talking about the power of the people in the seats. This is changing too. All right, so we are well down the road from that. So now like these people in the parishes are saying, well, if we don't like what the guy's preaching, we'll just go. We won't go to church. We won't go to this church. We'll go and hear John. We'll go hear John Wesley, or we'll hear one of John's guys preaching down on the corner, or preaching, he's preaching in the pub. It's like everyone's in the pub, and the guy, hey, can I share a message with you? And everyone puts down their glasses, and they listen to a message. It's like it's happening. It's like they're meeting people where they're at. It's like, so this is, it's crazy. It sounds crazy, So they are changing the church dynamic, all right? They're changing the church dynamic. Okay, now what else? Now what else needed to change is the music had to change. The music. Now Charles Wesley's writing hymns, and then Isaac Watts is 12 years old, and he tells his dad, who's the leader of the church, the pastor of the church, Dad, the songs stink. And so what does Dad say? Why don't you write better ones? And what does Isaac decide to do? He does. Dad, what are you preaching about on Sunday? Like Bach. What's the preacher preaching? I'm going to write a cantata for it. Isaac Watts began to write, genius music and theology. And he wanted to teach the ordinary. He wanted to reach, this was his heart, reach the ordinary Christian with the passion of songs. So you have John Wesley wants people to be organized into a method of living, a routine. Revival's great, but routines are also. What about holy habits? Do you have holy habits? Do you have any of them yourselves? They're important. Really, if it wasn't for people with holy habits, everything would fall apart. The church is the only reason that the sun isn't crashing through the moon and swallowing the whole earth. It's like the church is the only reason that holds back judgment from God. It's like we are here, and we are the reason there. So he would, his genius, he would do that. So again, I got another song for you. When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, we'll listen to it later. So I'll just get past those verses for you. And you can listen to it and read the verses when they go by with the music. Much better. It'll be a much better experience later on in about 20 minutes, half an hour. All right. Next, Whitefield. Who is he? What is he? What is he doing? This is just a man who knew how to preach. He just had a fire about him. He was he was convinced. He was convinced of the sovereignty of God. I think we could say he's the first preacher that really. Now, John Calvin wrote about the sovereignty of God, and he preached through things, and he analyzed and he exegeted things to give us the basis for the sovereignty of God. But the man who really communicated the sovereignty of God and the power of God in his spirit on both sides of the Atlantic, in England and then here in America. He, it's George Whitefield. He was just, Just the way that he preached it, you could see he had an effect on it. And he's going to give a very good sermon advice in a couple of minutes. You'll see it. Okay, so he had 7 tours of the American colonies. So the activity of George Whitefield is waking up something in the people of America, and it is waking up their hearts to a sense of independence, and this is going to fuel the awakening. And the awakening, I think they said that by the time the American Revolution happened, like most Americans had heard 6,000 to 7,000 sermons in the course of their lifetime, if they were adults. They had heard sermons. They had been faithful to church. Why did America become what it became at that point in time? It's because these people believed that they had something from God and that they were on a mission from God to create something. So he was barred from pulpits. He was too good of a preacher. So a crowd of 30,000 heard him in Philadelphia. All right? Among the people who listened to him was Ben Franklin. You know who Ben Franklin is? Huh? We got that? We're okay over here? I don't have to put my head down. I don't have to put my head down. You know who Ben Franklin is, besides the fact that his picture's on a $100 bill. All right, so you know who Ben Franklin is. Okay. All right, Ben Franklin was so moved by what George Whitefield did, he bought a piece of property in Philadelphia so George Whitefield would have a place to preach all the time. That piece of property became the University of Pennsylvania. Harvard was started to make preachers in 1638. When Harvard became too liberal, guess what happened? A group of Puritan and church members started Yale because they wanted a more spiritual environment. And we're going to meet another guy named Roger Williams, who started Brown University. All these are Ivy League colleges now. Penn, Harvard, Yale, and Brown. All of them were started because, okay, why do you have a Bible college? Because we want people to learn the Bible the way we want them to learn the Bible. Okay? That's not the mission statement that's Pastor Matt would give you, but it's the mission statement I would give you. Why do we have a Bible college? Because we think you should learn the Bible the way that we know the Bible. Do we know the Bible best? We know it the way we know it. Is it the best? God will tell us. But that's what I'm saying. Why are there so many colleges? Well, because, why are there so many Bible colleges? Because we think we teach the Bible the best way. And if you learn it our way, then you just might be really effective at a lot of different things. I don't know. It doesn't mean that it's the place for you, but it doesn't mean that we should come down and say, no, we're not that great. We are. We're pretty good. Let's face it, we're pretty good. We are. It's amazing. Hey, Oswald Chambers went to a Bible college that had 3 people in it. 3. And how many of you read his devotional? Yeah, there you go. See? 3 people in his Bible college. How many we got here? We got like 10 times that, right? Almost 30 people here. All right, there you go. Okay, so 30 years, George Whitefield, back to him. Evangelistic ministry. He was just, his way, he was just a powerful preacher. Wesley was the organized the movement, and Whitefield was the preacher that, brought this to people. So just thousands. So what was the result of these kinds of revivals? What was the result of this? Thousands of converts, just a missionary spirit, new schools, like I said, new schools, new colleges. The hearts were prepared. And this last point, in particular, as it relates to the United States of America, people were ready for freedom. All right? Okay, there's a true story. You can read it. I got to find it for you and give you, so you because I found it on the internet, and I got to locate it again. But a guy from China came to Harvard, and he was asked he was asked about this, and And the question came to him like, what do you think's the most important thing about America? And, the Chinese guy, he lives in a communist society and everything, the kind of thing. He said, probably the churches. The guy said, churches, why? He said, because you could never have enough police to control people if there weren't churches. This is a Chinese guy, because, he lives in a closed society. Everyone thinks of the same way. He says, in America, everything's open, but everything would fly apart if it wasn't for the churches. Okay. I didn't know what that was. Okay. Anyway. But this was, so George Whitefield, Charles Wesley, these people really prepared America for its freedom. Like the freedom was not going to happen. So what are some of the things that George Whitefield thought about preaching? He really thought about what he would say. It's a poor sermon that doesn't give offense, that neither makes the hearer displeased with himself nor with the preacher. So you should irk people. If you're preaching, you should irk them. Some people should leave your church angry, agitated. That should happen. So why? Because, the sermon should be touching a part of their lives. Now, this next one, I live by. I live by this. I know that I talk for a long time here, but I'm a teacher. That's different. You're paying for this. I got to give you quality for your dollars. That's the way it is. To preach more than a half an hour, a man should be an angel himself or have angels for hearers. How about that? A half an hour. That's always my answer. Like someone asked me, how long do you think I should preach? I said, well, George Whitefield said, anyone who preaches more than a half an hour, is not angelic. I just modify the statement. But this is what he said. If you preach more than a half an hour, it's like, I find that that's a good standard. It's like, and you're talking about, well, this is back in the day when people listened to a lot of things. They didn't have a lot of distractions. And he still said, like, people's capacity is about a half an hour, really. And Pastor Stevens used to say that, too. We had these notes to young preachers. He would say, he said, this, your introduction and then your solid preaching should be like 25 to 30 minutes. He said, yeah, you might have a little introduction, a little prayer at the end, but the centerpiece of your thing, it should be organized. It should be thought through. You should be led by the Spirit. A half an hour is good. All right. Now, here's the other thing. Now, here's one of the most important statements that George Whitefield would say. He would say, conversion means turning from self-righteousness. So this is the reason self-righteous people are so angry with gospel preachers, because the gospel does not spare those who will not submit to the righteousness of Jesus Christ. So this is, not only was Whitefield motivated by the sovereignty of God. So Whitefield did not get up thinking that his style was going to change people. He got up thinking that the sovereignty of God and the move of the Spirit was going to change people. And he said that a person is not converted unless he turns from all of this. Not just your outwardly wicked ways, not just from this, but your self-righteousness. You have to give up your self-righteousness. And if you don't, this is the thing that he's preaching. If you don't give up your self-righteousness, then you are not converted. You're not converted because you still think that you have a capacity to work your way into heaven. Okay. All right. So I've reached this point. There's a logical transition that I'm going into from here. So I'm going to give you your break right now. Is that okay? You want a break right now? All right, so take about 5 to 7 minutes, and we'll come back, and then we'll talk a little bit more about a couple more people, and then we have a couple songs for you to end with. All right, so there's the assignment here. You got some writings from Whitefield, Wesley, and Jonathan Edwards, who we'll talk about in a couple minutes, and then a couple of questions related to those readings. So get 2 pieces of paper. One you should keep and to yourself, and the other you'll turn in to me. All right? All right. Those who are on the outside looking in, they'll catch up to us. Okay. All right, let's think about this. I want to show you a little idea here. This is like just showing you the motion, the range of motion in everything that happened here in America, the move to the New World. So we see just all these sort of tentacles happening, people coming here to share. And I was just talking to Cody about probably the most, the most original place of religious toleration where any kind of religion was welcome was Pennsylvania. William Penn, didn't, you come here and you live a productive life, whatever your religion is, you can practice it. So many groups wound up in Pennsylvania. So I could show you here. Groups flocked to the colonies. I said, we've talked about the Huguenots, the Lutherans. They came here. The Dutch Reformed, Pennsylvania, Mennonites in Pennsylvania, Moravians to North Carolina. These are different, different groups that wound up in America. So you can see this kind of move that was happening. Another Catholics to Maryland, Anglicans all over, Puritans, Baptists, Baptists to Rhode Island, the Quakers, the Methodists. All these groups came to America, so you didn't have a homogeneous kind of Church of America. England, you had the Church of England under the Queen, under the King. It was a state church. In America, a different experience was happening. Now, I'm just mentioning this guy very carefully, just very quickly, Roger Williams, because he's really the original, in Massachusetts, there wasn't a state church, but in order to participate in the church, you had to belong to church. So I don't know if that makes sense to you. I can say that again if you want, but you had to be, like we talked about this, in order to vote, you had to be a member of a church in order to vote in the elections in New England in the original charter. Now, when King Charles II issued a new charter, he made the voting policy based on property, not on church membership. But but Roger Williams saw this happening, and the little colony of Rhode Island, he decided to. This is the thing, we're seeing that under the system of Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, that existed from the mid-1800s until the early 1500s, it was very hard to sort of separate yourself. But then once the Reformation happened, people felt, I can just go ahead and do something different. And Roger Williams did that. He saw this church connection as, as a problem. So, and he also was, he was also concerned with the way that the natives were treated. And so he moved and created a city called Providence and formed what would be called the First Baptist Congregation. This was like the first, the rules and they weren't Puritan, they were more Anabaptist. He was more of an Anabaptist, and so he opposed anything that could lead to a state church. Magistrates, the leaders in the government system, had no power over a man's religion, and they shouldn't be checking on whether people are going to church or not, and whether that should be a problem. So we could see that even in the beginning stages of the American movement, we see that this idea of churches, church being an individual, not being connected to the power of politics is important. Now, I think I mentioned last week that Harvard, this is John Harvard with his Bible open. This is still there. This is still there, and I wanted to show you this picture. I didn't show it to you last week, did I? This is from Harvard University, so it's still there. The guy reading his Bible. They haven't they haven't painted it with different colors, to sort of say, hey, this is what we are now. Anyway, but I'm probably someone will listen to this and I'm just giving them a bright idea up there at Harvard. But anyway, so. All right, now we got to talk about this part. Okay, now this is very important politically to America and this great awakening. The Great Awakening, Sinners in the Hand of in the Hands of an Angry God. All right, now, I hate the title of that sermon. I hate it. And some of the things that are said in that sermon are pretty powerfully difficult to listen to and read. He read this sermon twice. The first time he read it, it didn't really have any effect. The next time he read it, like people were falling at the pulpit, just crying out to God to be saved. All right? Now, what you're taking home tonight is the climax of that sermon, a piece of that sermon towards the end of it. You'll see it. But there are a lot of pieces in that sermon that when I read them, I'm sort of thinking, like, this seems very interesting about the character. Now, Jonathan Edwards was a brilliant man. He was just one of the most brilliant people who ever lived. At the age of 9, he's like writing these treatises on the activity of spiders, stuff like that. Very scientific, very philosophical, and really devoted to God. And so he was really concerned with the nature of the deadness in his churches. So when he started preaching and when people were affected by it, he could see that God was using him. Now, here's one of the things. You have an extraordinary opportunity, a day wherein Christ has flung the door of mercy wide open and stands in the door calling and crying with a loud voice to you poor sinners. So this is what he was trying to communicate. So this kind of movement, might have been the most brilliant American who lived. Just the nature, if you've read some of his writing and everything like that. We know this sermon about him, but we don't know other sermons about him. And his name comes up a lot for people who are anti-vaccine, because he became the president of what's now Princeton, and he got inoculated for smallpox, and then he died a couple weeks later. So, so this is like kind of interesting, Jonathan Edwards. But he was a Puritan minister. He started, this awakening happened. There was like revivals throughout Western Massachusetts into Connecticut and down into northern New York, this part of the country. Now, if you've lived in this part of the country, how many are from this country? You're from this part of the country, aren't you? Yep, you're from that part of the country. So Rome, New York, these upstate places, we know that there's a couple of revival seasons happened in this territory. And now we see that it's like this territory is very hard, liberal. And our own ministry experienced this when Pastor Stevens moved from Maine down to Western Massachusetts. I moved from Baltimore in 1985, and then I went to Massachusetts, and then I wasn't in Baltimore a couple weeks. I went out on a outreach and knocked on a door and said, "Hello, I'm from this place. I'm from the Bible Speaks." And the door got slammed in my face. And I'm like, "Oh, okay. So I'm in a different place now." Never happened to me in Baltimore. "Hey, I'm from the Bible Speaks." "Yes, sir, the Bible does speak." "How does it speak to you?" I get a lecture. The grandma preacher would come out from the kitchen. "Yeah, honey, you better know how to preach." Okay, anyway, so this, Edwards was really like concerned about the religious nature and the character of the people in the congregation and in America as a whole. So he really devoted himself to really trying to preach with the goal. Okay, if George Whitefield is preaching from the sovereignty of God, he's just preaching the Bible. Jonathan Edwards was more calculated in his sermons. He was calculating, he was crafting his sermons like an author, like literature, in order to provoke responses. So so this is like, this idea that the revival of religions are necessary, and we have come to understand in our ministry that the only kind of revival that really lasts is a Word of God revival. So if you are teaching people to be emotionally connected to God, that is not going to be a very lasting impact. But if you are giving people a powerful connection to the truth, the scriptures that they can carry with them out of the church every week, then that is much more effective, much more powerful, much more important. So, religious affections. He was really concerned about this nature of religious affections. And, this, we can't, what can I say about it? It's like, no, his ministry is important, but is it perfect? When we study church history, it's like we have heroes, but we also have to recognize that those heroes are people and that they had, they weren't, what do we call it? They weren't perfect people. We shouldn't deify them. We shouldn't, some people, once the movement's leader is gone, it falls apart, So if this church, our church here, was not built upon a Word of God revival, once Pastor Stevens exited the scene, then this would have fallen apart completely. D.L. Moody was a man who really believed in religious revival, and he really did what he could to, he actually came from this area where Jonathan Edwards preached. So he had a legacy from that, and he too believed in this idea of surrendering to God, this instant conversion, this coming to God with your whole heart. And it's where we get these ideas of giving your heart to Jesus. You'll read some articles now that sort of question that. It's like, and I understand where they're coming from, but it's like these arguments are really useless. It's useless because we really don't know we are not the Holy Spirit. We are not the Holy Spirit, and we are not God who is sovereign. We don't orchestrate circumstances, and the way people get saved in the Bible is very different in every situation. We don't have like a plastic formula that we can lay, a model that we can lay over everybody. Even though we print a prayer on the back of our tracts that we pass out, it's like, excuse me, if we get somebody to pray that prayer, something deeper has to have happened in their hearts in order for there to be a true conversion and a true salvation. So, George Whitefield, John Wesley, Jonathan Edwards, I think you have to take all of them together and see, yes, you should be affected by the Word of God and the Spirit of God. You should have religious affections. Yes, you should believe in the sovereignty of God and that He is ruling in your life and everyone else's life. And yes, you should have a method to your madness. It's madness. You are the maddest people on the planet. We are the maddest people on the planet. Everyone thinks that we are fools, and we are the right kind of fools because we know that the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of men. So, so whatever you take from tonight's class, please take all of these pieces from all of these people that we've talked about tonight: Jonathan Edwards, John Wesley, George Whitefield, and don't forget Susanna. It all started with Susanna. It all started with her. 19 children. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. How? How did that happen? It was just a chore to raise 3. Oh. Anyway, so, all right. All right, so now it comes to that time in our class when we must have music. So we bid you farewell, watching online, whatever you're doing. We'll put the links to these things. But I got 2 songs for you tonight. One from Charles Wesley, which is Jesus, Lover of My Soul. I think this is sung by the remarkable Fernando Ortega. Very good singer. And then we also have, what's the other one? What was the other one? Oh, gosh, what did I call it? What is it? What's the song? I got to find the song now. Huh? It's here. It's here. I gotta find it. Okay, play this one. Let's play this one.